Hello and welcome to another episode of Mind Map. Today's topic of discussion is land reforms in India. First of all, we will discuss about the introduction of the topic. Then we will discuss about land ownership patterns, objectives of land reforms, features, outcomes, problems in implementation, and lastly, way forward. First of all, let's have a look at the introduction of the topic. Land reform usually refers to redistribution of land from the rich to the poor. More broadly, it includes regulation of ownership, operation, leasing, sales, and inheritance of land. Indeed, the redistribution of land itself requires legal changes. In an agrarian economy like India, with great scarcity and an unequal distribution of land, coupled with a large mass of the rural population below poverty line, there were compelling economic and political arguments for land reform. Not surprisingly, it received top priority on the policy agenda at the time of independence. In the decades following independence, India passed a significant body of land reform legislation. Now let's discuss about land ownership patterns. Even during the British period, 40% of the area came under the princely states. The pattern of ownership on this land was based on concepts that varied from the medieval to modern. After independence, the question of land was discussed in detail at the Constituent Assembly and Parliament. Since India had decided to become a democratic republic, it was decided that a land distribution should be more just and equitable. Encouraged by centre, the state governments passed the Zamindari Abolition Act and other similar acts to bring about some regularity in the ownership pattern of land. According to one study, the area under sharecroppers had come down from 42% in 1950-51 to around 20 to 25% in the 1960s. In a fresh analysis, the NSSO finds that more than 40% of households in rural India do not own land. As much as 15 million acres is in ownership holdings of more than 20 acres, and inequality in ownership has worsened between 1992 and 2003-04. Now let's discuss about objectives of land reforms. The 1949 Constitution left the adoption and implementation of land and tenancy reforms to state governments. This led to a lot of variation in the implementation of these reforms across states. Land reforms' main objectives were rational distribution and use of land resources, land ceiling to disburse surplus land amongst small and marginal farmers, raising production level, removal of exploitation by zamindars and intermediaries, social welfare, planned development, and raised the standard of living. Now moving on to features of land reforms. The land reforms after independence had four components. The abolition of the intermediaries. Abolition of intermediary and zamindars led to strengthening actual landholders and cultivators. The abolition of intermediaries made almost 2 crore tenants the owners of the land they cultivated. Tenancy reforms. Tenancy reforms aim to regulation of rent, provide security of tenure, and conferring ownership to tenants. The tenancy reforms laws provide the provisions for registration of tenants or giving ownership rights to the former tenants. Fixing ceilings on land holdings. It means the maximum size of land holdings an individual can own. And consolidation of land holdings. It is a planned readjustment and rearrangement of fragmented land parcels and their ownership. It is usually applied to form larger and more rational land holdings. Now let's discuss about outcome of land reform. Zamindari abolition led to the elimination of zamindars and jagirdars. As a result of the abolition of intermediaries, about 2 crore tenants estimated to have come in direct contact with the state, making them owners of land. Reduced the exploitation of the cultivators, who now became the landowners. With a cap on the size of land holding, an individual or family could hold. Equitable distribution of land was possible to an extent. Tenants cannot be evicted without any reason. They can be evicted only in accordance with the laws. Land can be resumed by the landlord only on the ground of personal cultivation, but the landlord can resume the land only up to a maximum limit. The landlord should leave some area to the tenant for his own cultivation. The tenant in no case should be landless. And it had led to large-scale eviction, which in turn has given rise to several problems: social, economic, administrative, and legal. Now let's have a look at the problems in implementation. The landowners often took advantage of the loopholes in the land reform laws. At some places, they managed to evict their sharecroppers and to save their land from the Hadbandi Act. Moreover, they started keeping land in fictitious names. The reforms were not uniform and left to the will of the states. Only few states carried out the land reforms, that also with much non-uniformity. There were many exemptions in these reforms which led to the inefficient implementation of the law. Through these exemptions, zamindars were able to retain the lands in their hands. Now lastly, let's discuss about the way forward. The land reform is clearly driven by political factors. The supply of land reform seems to depend on the electoral success of political parties as well as how tight the electoral competition is. The evidence suggests that land reforms had a negative effect on poverty while the effect on productivity is mixed. In states where these measures were strongly implemented, the effect of land reform on productivity seems positive. The loopholes exploited by the landlords or zamindars should have been addressed beforehand, and the land records must be digitalized and consolidated, and the reforms must be done simultaneously. Now it's time for the practice questions. First of all, prelims based question. With reference to land reforms in independent India, consider the following statements. 1. The sealing laws were aimed at family holdings and not individual holdings. 2. The major aim of land reforms was providing agricultural land to all the landless. 3. It resulted in cultivation of cash crops as a predominant form of cultivation. 4. Land reforms permitted no exemptions to the ceiling limits. How many of the above statements is or are correct? Only 1, only 2, only 3, or all 4? And now mains question. Discuss the role of land reforms in agricultural development. Identify the factors that were responsible for the success of land reforms in India. So that's all for today. Stay tuned for the next episode. Thanks for watching.